Scalf, Director of the Department of Community Development, accompanied by Stacie, Hoskins, Planning Manager, Shoreline Administrator, and Michelle McConnell, Associate Planner. Take it away, please, Al.
Good morning, Mr. Commissioner, Mr. Chairman, and members of the board. Let's go to Michelle McConnell, please.
Okay, good morning, Commissioners. As you know, in January of this year, Ecology issued a conditional approval of our locally approved Shoreline Master Program. They had a number of both required and recommended changes and that they want the county to consider. And in June of this year, we released a draft response to Ecology regarding those required or recommended changes, as well as including a number of proposed clarifications for the document. And you welcomed public input and held a public hearing. Closed the public comment period in July, and we are now ready to support you as you consider the comment letters that came in, roughly 60 or so, as well as the verbal testimony from the public hearing, about 19 people that testified. And look forward to helping you finalize the response to Ecology regarding those some 63 possible changes to the locally approved SMP. As you know, we do have a statutory deadline of December 1st of this year for final adoption. So we are mindful of the calendar and can certainly talk with you about that if you'd like as well. And we also know that there's some interest regarding the substitute Senate Bill 5451 in regards to terminology of conforming and non-conforming. And so we've done some consideration of that, conferred with both Ecology and with our legal counsel, David Alvarez. Ecology's position is that it was not and is not a required or recommended change. They didn't, submit any kind of letter to the county regarding that new legislation. And it is an optional feature of the statute. It says that jurisdictions may address the terminology concern. They also directed us to confer with our own legal counsel in regards to whether or not the county wanted to address that with the formal response to Ecology, because we were concerned whether it would require another round of public input. And so Ecology suggested that we confer with our own legal counsel, which we did. And in speaking with David Alvarez, we've concluded that indeed, if any new text were proposed to address that, SSB 5451, that hadn't already been vetted, which there hasn't been any vetted, so it would indeed need to go back through a public review period with a comment period with a public hearing.
And you have a deadline of December 1 to get this done.
So we have looked at that, and we can certainly talk with you in more detail about that if you're interested. But look for you guys to review the comments, deliberate on the issues, and give direction to staff here as to how to finalize that formal response to Ecology. Notably, the finfish aquaculture topic is one of great interest, and we recognize that. One thing to consider is if the board feels like they want additional discussions on that topic, we might start with the low-hanging fruit, if you will, of the other items on that list of 63. So perhaps give us guidance on 1 through 12 and 16 through 63. But that's up to your discretion, and we'll support you as best we can. Any questions?
Well, just to go on to 5451 to start with, did look at that and some of the comments we've had made to us. Followed up and even talked with the sponsor of the bill and others, about it. My understanding is that in a lot of ways it really doesn't change anything. That people still have to comply with the same rules, the same laws, regardless of whether we adopt that or not. Really tried to get at what's the real problem that's trying to solve. And it seems it's one of perception. That, you know, the main concern I heard was that, you know, people buying property in particular, people that were looking to buy property in Jefferson County would see non-conforming being disclosed and have concerns about that. And that by changing this language, they wouldn't see that, so they wouldn't be concerned. It wouldn't affect prices, and that's become a concern because there's been so much, in some ways, actually, misinformation about what non-conforming means. You know, there's people that are concerned about not being able to get loans on their property or not being able to get insurance, and those haven't, there's been no evidence that's come forward that shows that's true. In fact, some experience to the opposite. So, since people still have to comply with all the new rules, it would seem that not disclosing that upon sale would be unfortunate. You know, they should know what they're getting into. That's the whole idea behind real estate disclosure laws, is for people to know, okay, these are the situations you're getting into. And the fact that because of politics, in a lot of ways, perception problems have been created around non-conforming. You know, that's unfortunate. You know, you'd like to have people have accurate perception of what's going on. But people do need to know that they need to conform to the new rules, and that there is an issue if they're buying something that is perfectly legal and allowable under the old rules, still legal and allowable as it is under the non-conforming rules, that they be aware of that. So, I don't see it.
And part of the new SMP adoptions create actually a more sense of non-conformities.
Right.
And so it's those legal uses that are existing and then brought forward under new SMPs that creates more burden under non-conformity.
Right. Just like there was under the last one, 72, you know. My property became non-conforming in 72, and it hasn't been an issue for all that.
Michelle had created a little diagram that I think you're fairly clear on nonconformity, but we thought, you know, just for ease of looking at it, that most people don't have a aversion to being called grandfathered, and so it was just trying to visually show the distinction between legal and illegal, and then conforming and non-conforming, and how that might branch out.
But even calling it grandfathered, it's not that you said, no, we'll call it that. You said non-conforming doesn't change the legal requirements they have to follow.
Correct.
I guess the question would be whether or not, let's say that you do put the language in, is the person, so the person had a non-conforming structure, then it became conforming through this bill and through the SMP, and then they want to expand it, whether or not that would be, whether or not they're better off with the title of conforming than opposed to non-conforming if they want to expand that structure. They would still have to meet the same rules, and they would, yeah, and so I guess that's one question that should be thought about, you know, by staff, whether or not it helps the person to have the status of conforming, should they want to expand later at a date that's post-adoption of our new SMP.
Well, and the other thing that, another little wrench in the wheels, is that you could have a house that's non-conforming to the 150-foot buffer with a 10-foot setback, but under our proposed code, under the non-conforming parcel section, you could have a conforming residence constructed. So, you know, if someone were to come in later and wanted to expand a home that didn't meet the 160-foot setback, we first would look under the code, is there an allowance on a non-conforming lot where they may still be conforming to the code?
And the other thing is that this happens automatically. I mean, it happens by some operation of law. If you got a permit and your house was there before the SMP comes into effect, your house is automatically legally non-conforming. I mean, so you have that automatically. And those are well respected in the law and typically cannot be, they can be, they can't be taken away, it's a property right.
Sorry, Phil.
Yeah, to me, as I reviewed 54, 51, it raised some questions for me. One is related to what David just asked, and that is, if you've got a legal non-conforming structure that now you're calling conforming, but now it wants to expand, and does that mean you would suddenly be looking at whether the expansion complies with the setbacks? And so it actually, you could be worse off than under our non-conforming provisions, potentially, it seems to me. Or at least there's a question I have. I'm not trying to draw a conclusion. That's something I want to make sure that the cure is not worse than the problem.
Well, I think as soon as you wish to add on, we look at the non-conforming section. So it does create a little confusion.
Even though they might be called conforming, you would look at the non-conforming section.
Well, they're conforming until they want to add on
Take
to it.
Okay.
So it's it could be terminology for an interim period until you then say, I want to do some sort of new activity, and rather than thinking of better or worse, it's, I guess really, I think we look at it as just determining which pathway and process to follow in terms of reviewing.
So at that point, it's really the same. And so what have you gained? The second thing is, there's provision in the act that talks about that, while it would be conforming, that the jurisdiction still needs to ensure that there's no net loss. And so I'm worried that or a question I would have is whether we would need to be doing some supplemental review or have another set of standards as what previously were legal non-conforming now are called conforming and are expanding. We've already, I think, dealt with the no net loss issue with ecology, and would this impose now a new set of standards that we would, because of this change and this imposition of saying, okay, now you need to assure no net loss, whether that creates uncertainty and another layer of standards and review that we would need to apply. And then finally, this legislation was adopted this session, and we have been criticized at times in the past for being on the cutting edge, sort of the beta testers of new legislation. And this is one where I wonder if it would be more prudent to see what other jurisdictions are doing, let whatever wrinkles need to get worked out through the courts and or any appellate bodies, and then see if there's something that perhaps as a future amendment we may want to, if there's something to be gained, and once the wrinkles have been worked out, so that we have some reasonable assurance that, again, that the cure is not worse than the illness, do it then. I'm a little worried with some of the questions that are still out there about what this really means, about whether we'd be actually creating more of a problem than we have now, as well as the deadline issue that David Alvarez mentioned in terms of having to go through another round of public hearing.
Thinking of that deadline, and I'm also thinking we have a public hearing for Ruckel's House, and we've got to make a decision on that. We've got to make a decision on the SMP. And we also have citizens who are asking us to introduce other legislation locally, like a noise ordinance that's been put off and put off. So I know I'm not enthusiastic to add 54, 51 to our current deliberations, but certainly I'm open. You guys are.
No, I agree.
No, okay.